this is Zoe. Welcome back to the Videoverse podcast. So this time I have Krishna, our team member who is based in Bangalore, to join me as a co-host. Hi, Krishna.
Hey Zoe, thank you so much for inviting me to be a co-host on this episode. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, so this episode we have the pleasure and honor to invite Romain, who joined us, and then I would like him to actually say, and then let yourself to introduce. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so my name is Romain Bouqueau. I'm been mostly known for being an open source contributor on the GPAC open source project. So that's a multimedia project, mostly known for packaging, streaming, distribution around the ISO BMFF MP4 file formats. So I think we're going to say more about this. Um, Now I start to be a veteran in this industry. I've started 20 years ago in several companies. Before 10 years ago, I started my own business around the GPAC open source project, so providing professional services and licenses.
So yeah, we are talking about GPAC. So this
Absolutely.
is something you have been dedicated to. And then recently, not recent, so GPAC and then together with the Think Motion Spell that
Yes.
you are leading the effort then. And we like to learn more. I know that most of the audience could know JPEG well, and then especially for us, like we use MP4 box almost on a daily basis. So you may want to still put a little bit of effort and time. Let's discuss about this. I have some short intro about all these open source platform softwares that actually influence our daily life. Uh, yeah.
So it's really interesting in the multimedia area because we have many open source software that were created in France exactly at the same time. So we have GPAC, we have FFmpeg, we have
Yes.
VLC, we have Media Info. There are many other French projects like TSDuck, for example, for manipulating MPEG TS. So there was a funny things happening at the time. And for GPAC, this was made by a trainee actually who left France to go in New York City to make a startup. And that was the .NET bubble. It just so the bubble exploded, and the guy came back to work in a university. So this person is Jean Lefebvre. He's the creator of GPAC, and so they open sourced the code that had been made for this startup, and that's the beginning of the story of GPAC. And what is
I see.
funny is that at this moment there was a merge of several audiences. What people have to understand is that 25 or 30 years ago, people had visions of what computing would look like, and it was like Second Life. Some VR environments with a lot of interactivity, immersiveness, real time. So they had a vision of what they imagined it could be. And so we had this new technology like Macromedia Flash, and MPEG at the time said we need a set of standards that would be open standards as an alternative that would be better. And so they made MPEG 4. So MPEG 4 is a set of standards. There are some video codecs in it, and the most successful is H.264 AVC, MPEG AVC. That's ubiquitous. For audio, there is AAC. So it's a set, the MP4 file format, of course, but that's also scenes, interactive scenes with some scripting, with some text, subtitle, streaming of text, and so many other things like metadata that are still in use or not up to today. And so when GPAC was done, it was not only 2D video like TV like experiments. And what I was going to say is that there was a merge. Like the users of the failed startup followed what GPAC was doing because the people were interesting, the project was interesting. So some people started to use it when it was open source. The creator of GPAC went to work in a university. So they were researchers, they were students, and that was the big era, I think, of piracy. And so there were a lot of people, starting to grab the videos and putting them in a new MP4 container that looked so promising. And what is funny for us is that GPAC has evolved. When I joined it, like in 2007, we were doing still some 3D crazy stuff, and eventually we discovered that some of the pirates became CTO of big companies like YouTube. And so they came back to see us and they said, guys, would you do some business with us? Because we just run into production and now we have production problems. And I think that's part of the things that triggered the creation of the, GPAC licensing and the motion spell company. At first, it's just we could cover everything that was research and R&D, but the maturity and the level of service and the speed at closing the deals, etc., was just insufficient in the university. If the university had been good, I would be probably a researcher and teaching in the university.
Yeah, well, different sectors have different expertise. I think the researchers must always look into something really deep and then predict what's going to happen maybe longer into the future.
Yeah, so that's one of the strengths actually of GPAC. I think that in terms of R&D, we are so much ahead of many of our competing projects.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's really interesting, I think, for companies because most of the time when they need a new feature, it's already in GPAC. For example, when Apple released their headset, they decided to use the multi-view MVH-EVC codec,
Right. Yeah.
and it's been in GPAC for years. So you just had to take a video from the headset, you could edit it, you could edit your own videos, it just worked. You could distribute it, you could dash it, you could encrypt it.
Yes.
So I think R&D is a big differentiator. Also
Okay.
another differentiator, I think, compared to the other open source projects, I think open source is trendy. There is a lot of companies doing open source, but the problem is if you don't have a community, like real people dedicating in their free time, using it, maintaining it, it just doesn't work. Like companies have created open source software, and at some point, when nobody is willing to maintain it, the open source projects just disappear. So if you look, for example, there are two other. So we do mostly packaging, I think, for as a business, and there is Bento4 and Shaka Packager also operating in a space. But the problem is they've been created by companies or individuals, and they have no maintainers anymore. And so the question is, what do you do with it? It's always the problem of sustainability in open source. I think GPAC has a really good balance because we have, all these massive R&D, we have this massive community, and so it's my role to make sure that everybody's happy, but that makes the project really sustainable and innovative and flexible.
So just picking off that last sentence of yours, Roman, um, community, maintainers, and contributors. How do you get these three, right, to keep open source things sustainable?
So we have an arrangement. Basically, when I created Motion Spell, what I wanted to do was to attract the GPAC talents so that they can make it a living. You can contribute to open source and get some money back. That was the idea. So we managed to do this up to a certain point. I think it's really difficult to retain talent. I think talent is a problem for any company. And that was the case for us. And we used to be like a full remote company, so attracting a lot of people. But then with COVID, a lot of companies became attractive as well because they were remote. So that was not so much about a differentiator. And about redistributing the gains, it really works well. That's really a nice way, I think, for people contributing to get some money back. That's also recognition. You see your name on stuff. So if you're looking for a job, you see your name attached to a specific feature on a project that is as big as GPAC. So, but yeah, for me, sustainability is something that is really, really important. And I think over the years, people have become sensible to the stories where they all rely on an open source software that's been maintained for 20 years by one guy somewhere in the world. Not sustainable at all. But we don't have this problem in GPAC. And 10 years ago, I created this company just to make sure that it would be sustainable for the people willing to make it a living.
Got it.
So this way, actually, that's what will enjoy the existing functionality and features. There's two parts. You always see something that maybe that you need of, and which has not been offered yet. So that's basically we want some new things to add it to the existing. On the other side, even for the existing feature, there's always a different way to use it. And then sometimes, especially when you actually work on a lot of different use cases, there may be some course case that has not been covered. That's always the case. That's why even the most advanced companies, they have the patches and patches into the existing release. So there's some support that also needed by the open source software. So you mentioned sustainability is really, really important. Otherwise, it's the community really rely on this, and then they also return help build the confidence
Yes.
for that.
Yeah, that's true. So about the contribution, I think some people, some technical people are really open to contribute, but when you have to deal with businesses, it's a bit more complex. You're an engineer inside a corporation, you want to contribute, you depend on the lawyers of your corporation. So that's where we try to make it as easy as possible, so there are contributor license agreements, but otherwise we just propose professional services. And in most of the cases, it's just so much easier for companies to pay for someone else to do the stuff and not have to deal with
Okay.
two things. First, the legal part, but also the maintenance. Because when you pay for development in GPAC, it's going to be maintained forever, for free.
Mm.
If you do it internally, you have to maintain it. Your teams have to maintain it, and this has a cost. And then there is the second point that you raised, Zoe, that is super important. That's the usability in general, like the use cases, etc. So we're trying to address this in different ways. We're trying to continuously get feedback. That's really difficult because open source software don't have analytics. Basically, GPAC and MP4 box, when you download them, they are just tools that you use and we don't get any analytics from you. So we don't know how you use the software. And as a business, that's a problem because you want to know as much as you can what is the behavior of your users and customers. So that's yeah. But we have other ways to do it. We have a website where we have cookies and we try to track the user journey. And it's important for us to have good documentation and more professionally to propose trainings. So you're a company, you want to use GPAC and you can buy trainings and we can propose something that is more custom and personalized so that, you step up. There is also something else that we would like to do and, we try to go this way. I think there is a lot of, and it's similar for any technical tool. I think there is a lot of friction. It's really difficult when you have a new tool to go from zero, I need this tool, I know I need a packager, I need to stream, I need to encrypt, I need to put advertisement, up to the point where you're operational and you're independent in the way you operate. And so, okay, we can train you, but then if you need us again, because I don't know, you didn't understand something or whatever, you have the documentation, but you need to pay again. And so, of course, there is the community, but there are so many problems in big organizations, like the teams change, etc. And so I would like to mitigate that. So we've started to lower the friction using WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is a way to run some code directly in the browser. A project like GPAC has two types of community users. There are developers, and we have power users, people not able to develop using the command line. That's the same for FFmpeg, I guess, and many other tools. And the problem is you need to go to the website. You need to be able to install the tool. If you're on a platform that is not supported, you need to build it yourself. It just creates so much friction for so many users. WebAssembly allows us to run in a browser. So of course it's not feature complete, but it's great because when you're in a browser, you can also present it in a different way. So we have the wasm.gpac.io. You can try it for free. And you have some presets that allows you to launch directly GPAC from your browser. So I think it lowers the friction for people to start using it. And I would like to go a step further. I think that a lot of these tools, a lot of packagers or even FFmpeg, there are not so many people using it every day. At Visionular, you need it like every day. But in some teams and companies, people use it, they do their stuff, and then they forget about it for quite some time. I think we just miss a place that would be even more user-friendly, where people would get the information about GPAC, but it's not so much about GPAC, it's about solving your video problem. So that would be a graphical place, probably in the web, where you solve your problems and you have a graphical way, like with a user interface that makes it more, that leverage the social part, the community part of GPAC, and that helps you, describe your problem and find solution to your problem. And of course, operating this as a company means that it's a kind of community place that just leverages the open source software, or I should say several open source software, because GPAC leverages other open source software as well. And, putting the focus on solving the problems of the users, but making it so much easier to use, making people come back to this place again to solve their problems, so that, it's not like, 2 years ago, I solved the same problem, but I don't remember how I did it. What was the name of this, project?
Yeah. With the advent, I think of with the ease of large language models, I think you might have a pretty easier path towards this if you can feed it all the documentation and actually train it to give answers.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's part of the solution. Because most of the time the journey of the users is, I have a problem and I ask for some answers. Can be to an LLM, can be ChatGPT, can be Google, can be whatever place, or their colleagues, or and that's the moment where, from the GPAC perspective, of course I'd like to have more users on GPAC. So I'd like this entity to answer, have a look at GPAC. But the problem is that's an SEO problem. So that's the first problem that we need to solve. Now, how can we be visible? So we can improve this by, as you mentioned, rightfully, train an LLM on the documentation, just to make sure that at least the people reaching GPAC can find solution to their problems. Because for us, that's the second step. People discover GPAC, and then can GPAC solve their problem? Yes or no? And that should be clear. Because GPAC is really abstract for some people. It's just packaging, that's nothing visual. So you arrive on the website, you're not sure it's the right tool. We want to make sure that people, easily know if that's an answer to their problem, yes or no. And if it's yes, I want to make sure that people remember about us.
Yeah.
That's a customer journey.
So back to, again, we are here talking all about GPAC as well as all the services and support behind Motion Spell, actually to, I would say, not only advocate GPAC, but mainly you mentioned the sustainability of a open source software, and that needs actually by the whole open source community. So you're basically really facilitating this vision and mission for this open source. And this is actually, we got some questions like, they say, there's an open source, it's supposed to be free, but then there's a commercial company. And then they usually will think that the other ways is a commercial company is leveraging what has been achieved by the open source to support them. But here, we actually realized together how this commercialization effort to actually in return to support to actually make a long life of this open source community and software platform. So can you also give us like I would say a big picture of motion spell and give us audience what exactly services and products that it offer, and then how is actually support. You just mentioned several points already, the developers, the users, and including individual users, and as well as the big player, like big ones, they also want to, let's say YouTube came to you to want to leverage this. So can you give us a big picture and how motion spec is actually providing?
Yeah, so that's an entry point for companies. I think lots of companies, open source, I've seen the change over the last decade. 10 years ago, it was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to use open source. And these companies just became dinosaurs because the technology has evolved so fast. But open source commoditizes everything, right? When you have a good open source option, it's just going to take a large share of the market. Look at FFmpeg. When it comes to encoding, in any team there are people using FFmpeg. If you need to package and, I don't know, you need to encrypt your content and you need to package it for Dash, you're going to use MP4 box. And I think that's really one of the strengths. Now, the problem is for some companies it's just impossible, or they have larger needs. So they want to have some support, they want to have some trainings, they want to have some custom developments. Companies have many questions and they don't operate at all like a group of students or a group of passionate people. So you need to find a right balance as a community on who can give what to the community to make it sustainable. For me, that's the key word. That's the key word. And to what we offer, so whether you're a small or a big company, you can contact us. We have a contact form. Some people contact us on LinkedIn as well. And most of the time we just operate as any service company. So we try to understand what is the business need and we try to address it the best way. All the rest is transparent for companies. Companies don't care if the people answering are employees, freelancers, people from the open source communities or whatever. We just make it transparent. It needs to be easy for everybody. I don't know if it answered your question, but for example, for Netflix, they contacted us, they had questions, and at some point they said, we want to continue working with your open source packager. Is there a way to have some professional services on the top of it so that we start deploying and we see how it goes? And yeah, hopefully it went until full deployment, so that was really great for us, and we got this press release. That's really a highlight for us because companies using open source, most of the time they just stay silent about it. And Netflix were so nice to communicate about it, so that's good publicity for us. And I think it opened doors also for some companies doing, you know, shamefully some open source stuff and not saying that, you know, it's not shameful. For a company like Netflix, they just said it openly. They are not competing on this. They are competing on other stuff like the content they have and how they serve their users. It's not necessarily on their packaging.
Yeah, it's basically you don't have to remake the wheels. I think that's they can actually leverage
Yeah,
what example JPEG and MP4 boxes provide.
yeah. Again, I think it's a combination. Yeah, if you do it in-house, you have to pay for the development, you have to pay for the maintenance, you have to do the R&D, and that's where the thing that I said before, if you have an open source software that that everything becomes a commodity. And I think, as I said, we've created the right balance. We have the R&D, we have the right structures, we are not too big to have problems, but we are not too small so that we're really sustainable with enough contributors. So I think we're at the sweet spot that makes it super interesting to work with us. That's my opinion, and that's what I see. Companies actually, we have moments where there are too many companies contacting us at the same time, so that we can serve them, well. So we're trying to find solutions for companies. Like sometimes they don't need professional services, but they need more training, etc. And with the initiative that I mentioned before, like creating something that would be more graphical, etc. We're just trying to find the right balance between the talents, the knowledge, and the availability that we have, and the actual needs that companies have. It needs to be affordable. We need to have a solution for any kind of, on the motions side, for any kind of customers that would come in to see us.
And what you mentioned about Netflix is also a good example of where a company paid for an open source and supported an open source project. I guess the other option is for companies to submit bug fixes. What is your perspective on this, Roman? It's an open secret. Everyone uses open source, goes to GitHub, finds something, downloads it, uses it. What is your suggestion on how corporations can give back?
Yeah, so I think the best feedback is actually the user feedback that we don't have because we don't track the users. So that's the first thing that we are looking after. So I think we have a better view of what the professional users do because they use technology in a different manner than the other ones, like especially in the streaming media industry. So in the streaming media industry, people are talking about personalized advertisements, DRMs. These are things that don't exist with our other customers. Like if you use GPAC, for example, for display in transportation, in trains, in hospitality, in elevators, for medical equipment, you just don't care about DRMs. You just don't care about advertisements. If you're someone just grabbing the videos from your camera and trying to stream it for small events, if you're working for a church or whatever, you don't care about this. So there are real easy ways for us to segment parts of the users. And then the professional users, they don't react the same ways as the other. They don't behave the same. Opening GitHub issues for communities, when they send emails, they don't behave the same. There are some Slacks, there are some spaces that are definitely open to professional users. LinkedIn, for example, I never received like some open source contributions on LinkedIn. Doesn't exist. But some people send comments or they send messages on LinkedIn. So it allows us to say, hey, there is some interest. For example, there's been a lot of interest in just-in-time packaging and transcoding recently. So I think that's because of the everything that is green. People just realized that they had appliances running 24/7. They just didn't need it. They just didn't need to transcode all of the good qualities and package for all the devices. That was just useless. And so they said, how can I just generate on the fly when people actually need it? Like there are tons of people generating for the PS3, the Sony PlayStation 3. How many simultaneous viewers do you have on this device? Or just for old Apple devices, just supporting AVC baseline profile. You generate all the time. But if you consider like that you're a content provider, for example, you're providing live or linear, and you have 200 channels. The least popular of your channels, you don't need to transcode them in all the formats all the time. So there is some popularity on this. And this is a use case that is typically for people trying to make money out of the video. That's the streaming media industry. And so, we can identify them and we can best serve them. So I'm trying to make sure that the professional users, their contribution is mostly money. That can be pull request also. But as I mentioned before, there is so much complexity legally for companies to have engineers contribute. But I have another customer, unfortunately I cannot name it, but probably we're going to make a press release before the end of the year, where we're receiving pull requests all the time. They send us files, they send us detailed reports on problems. That's so valuable for us. We're just trying to create the best software We're just trying to understand what people, use GPAC for. And so at some point, it's not only money, it's just building the best possible software, because when you have the best possible software, then it's just a black hole effect where everybody, comes to your project. But again, it's not only technical, it's also having the documentation, providing the right level of, support to all the users reaching you. And again, packaging is a niche. So I'm not trying to battle for SEO, It's only the people typing for the problems that GPAC can resolve that are going to come to GPAC.
Yeah, you basically mentioned at least one point. For example, for the open source, we all know that there is an open source community. There's a lot of users. They will actually give there and share their feedback. But if you have a commercial users like the one that you just mentioned, and then when they are willing to pay, they basically bring up the true extra market request. And then that request got back to you, and then you learn. And that actually add the true request for the features and functionalities that are needed by the market. And then this actually help iterate the product and offer from your side. So it is this kind of closed loop mechanism that help iterate the offering, as you mentioned. That's really the help sustain the community, because it's actually moving forward and also address the real needs in the market.
Yeah. So to do that, we need the awareness of the people that this is open source and this is a community effort, because it's free, right? And I'm on the worst possible business. I'm trying to sell something that is free. So I just want to make sure that people appreciate us, because we're approachable, we are knowledgeable, and they know that if they have impossible problems, they can reach to us, right? But it's not only this for me. If they need a training, they need to think about us. If they need some support on some stuff because they are using GPAC and they have problem, they need to think about us. And this is because as a whole, as a community, because the community is not only the people doing GPAC, it's not the core of GPAC, it's all the users. If we behave responsively, then it's going to be sustainable. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. Like, we're not a company, you're not paying a high price. Most of the users are just free riders. Really recently, I was trying to get some contact in a specific team at really, really big streaming companies, maybe the biggest competitors of Netflix. They came on our public issue tracker, and they were tracking the problems, not providing any sample, and they were behaving a bit aggressively. So I was trying to send messages to people on LinkedIn and saying, hey guys, maybe, I don't know, we can do things together, like, maybe you're not allowed to share your content, and that's the reason why you don't share it or whatever. And they just remained silent. And what can I do about this? Most of the commercial companies don't have the problem. If you don't pay, you can't use the service. But GPAC is an open source project, so okay, we have to deal with it. And that's the same with the other communities. It's not because that people are passionate that they are going to be, better contributors than the industry. It's just separate, communities. It's invisible for most of the people. When you work in the streaming media industry, you're always dealing with the same, 1 to 10,000 people. And basically, I would like to say we know each other, and we've known each other for years. And there are newcomers, etc. But we've been around for years dealing with this technology. But GPAC is more than that. I have customers. A couple of years ago, the streaming media industry was less than 50% of my business in motion spell. So GPAC is definitely not only streaming media, because the streaming media industry has difficulties to innovate. At the moment, it's a kind of shrinking market. Most of the R&D is elsewhere. I was discussing with Fabrice Laurenceau, the ex-CTO of LiveLike, bought by Cosm, because they have this spherical display, giant sphere where there is one in Las Vegas, but there are other ones in many big cities in the U.S. where you go to see your live sports events. And I saw people complain where we're talking about that's greenwashing stuff, etc. That's the same for Formula One. For me, these use cases are purely innovative use cases of the things that you may see in the future in the streaming area. For me, that's super interesting experience. So of course it uses a lot of energy, right? But if we hadn't this, who would do the innovation in the industry? Think of most of the big companies. Most of them have always zero R&D to push innovations. In front of big companies, just rolling marketing plans. They want you or they don't want you, and you just depend on them.
Correct.
As small innovative companies, for example, for Netflix, I think that people ask all the time, why did they choose you? And that's the case for all the other companies I can talk about and the one I can't talk about. That's the flexibility. You have this open source brick, you can do whatever you want, you can extend it on your own, etc. As small companies, we're really flexible. That's what we offer also to our customers. We can run on their own appliances, we can run in the cloud, we can run on a specific processor. We can do things that the big companies can't do.
That's amazing.
Thanks for mentioning
So,
innovation part.
yeah.
Yeah.
Roman, so now that you mentioned Netflix, could you take a couple of minutes to talk to us about that engagement? Because I think it's a huge win for GPAC. How did this entire engagement take place? What are you actually providing? How does GPAC sit in the Netflix infrastructure? Can you help us understand a little more of that?
Yeah. So they are sponsors. They give some money just to make sure that we're sustainable. I think any company using a GPAC or any open source project should consider having a fund where they give money. Even if not a lot of money, some years they may not be able to give, and some years they may be able to give. But I think it's important to give back, and for companies, giving back money when it's possible is an option. And then they buy some professional services. They need to investigate all the time in the R&D. And Netflix is not that big company. I don't know what is the right number, and maybe you can have a look at that. But the technical teams are not that big. So actually, they rely on us for some of the stuff. Can you investigate how it would be if we had to use this technology, or if you wanted to do this or this? And so they buy professional services. And most of the time, it's our passion, and Netflix is definitely an innovation-driven company. So that's possibly one of the best customers you can dream to have. But there are so many interesting use cases, of course, as well. I don't know if that answers your question, or if you have additional questions.
So what exactly does GPAC do in the Netflix framework? How did your entire engagement start? If you just walk us through that journey.
Yeah, so I gave a talk on stage at the NAB Streaming Summit by Dan Rayburn last year, and there was an engineer from Netflix on stage with me. They use MP4 Box for everything. They use it for processing the production files, which are stored in ProRes. So ProRes is basically a derivative, a profile of the QuickTime file format. And basically ISO BMFF, which is the basis of MP4 and CMAF, is a really close cousin to this. So they use it for production, they use it for distribution to the end users, and they use it also for the journalist previews, where they have specific constraints. And it's basically all the use cases that they have for video. So we are everywhere.
That's great.
So right now, GPAC not only just the several sectors is actually serving. So we see broadcasting, and see, like you just mentioned, Netflix, and in the OTT streaming, and then for a lot of users, there is definitely for different purposes, like user-generated content. So serving a lot of this, we do notice that for your effort, because this is closely related to new standards. So you also mentioned dash and then fragmented like MP4. And then we like to actually learn how you actually uh, get engaged, or how the relationship between your effort and the standardization community, because they actually try to auto absorb the new things into the standards and moving things forward. But then for you guys, you need to actually support all kinds of different standards, but there's also emphasis in the market needs. So we like to learn a little bit more how motion spell and JPEG relate to the standardization of these streamings, as well as even inside like a codec HEVC.
Okay, so we've been long time standard contributors. Uh, we have more than 500 contributions at MPEG, I think mostly in the file format group. Uh, that's because GPAC has roots in research. Actually, that's what I said. It's something that's missing in a lot of companies and a lot of open source software, where they don't know which technology is going to arise just because they don't make the effort of following it. And now companies, like a couple of years ago, companies have started to send people to MPEG and to W3C and to conferences, because there are many conferences that are more industry oriented, such as Mile High Video, for example. That's a conference with real research papers, and so the other conferences starting to do this, like IBC. But for us, it's not black and white. It's not you're doing R&D or you're doing standardization or you're doing this or this. There's a continuum of actions that makes your how do you say it, actions consistent. You're building stuff from the ground. But when it comes to, so we are pushing the standards and we're following some of the stuff. We cannot follow everything. And in GPAC, we cannot implement everything. So like any project, we did some good bets and we did some bad bets. But then on the motion spell side, on the commercial side, we also have trusted customers that are big consortiums, like 5G Mac for XR or CTA Wave for representing end users in the US, or we have a Smart CD collaborative research project, or we're going to be at the IBC Accelerator this year about ultra low latency on a project that is championed by Comcast. So that's where we're trying to do the link between the things that we understand and we in research and implementation. And when you think about GPAC as an innovative project, what is great is that it's really mature. It's a research project that is really mature and that allows you to go to market faster. So we have lots of customers actually who say, oh, I would like to go to VR, but I'm not sure it's going to take off. I start with GPAC. And I see if I have customers, it's a pure, lean approach where you put a proof of concept, you use open source to do it, and then you see what happens. And so I have many customers having licenses and professional services or taking agreements or taking trainings just to be up to date with some features. That's a missing link, right? If you do only deployments, you're always late. For example, recently we got many discussions with AOM that were related to AV2 and the conformance of AV2. If you're deploying AV1 now, you're late to the game. AV1's being done, 6 years ago it was implemented in GPAC? So if you're doing AV1 now, you're 6 years late compared to the actual work. And that's what I said. For the GPAC users, it's great. You're doing AV1 now. AV1 is mature in GPAC. You can take it and you can push it in production. YouTube's doing AV1. Netflix doing AV1. It's mature. It's deployable right now. So I think it's really appreciable for the customers because most of the time they just don't need to pay for an additional development. It's already here. And when they need to pay for an additional deployment, that's because okay, you've implemented AV1, but I'm using AV1 with this specific metadata, with this new HDR technology or whatever. You just, put your brick on the top of what's existing, and then you can deploy on your own. We try to make it easy and fluid and flexible.
Yeah, so you mentioned not only GPAC is an enabler of a lot of product and services, it's also the test bed because it's rooted, not just the innovation, because it's rooted on R&D from the very beginning. Because you also mentioned MVGVC, right? Previously in the conversations. So MVGVC is there for a while, and then it's also inside MP4 box. Because right now, we also mentioned when people mention, oh, we want to do a video that can be a special video that can be played back on Vision Pro, and what kind of tools? I believe people think the first one is MP4 box out of GPAC. And so that's actually addressing the VR sector. And but you also mentioned you can't choose everything. So we're wondering how this one, MVHEVC, right now at least empowering the potential of VR XR in the special video world. And this GPAC has actually played a critical role down there. And you chose it in the first place. That has been there for a while.
Yeah. So I don't think there is any future for MVHEVC, to be clear. It's just encoding one eye and making some prediction on the other eye. So people are not going... Actually, you can use MVHEVC for multi-angle cameras, etc. But you have other options. It's a bit awkward, right? As you know, I remember in 2008, I was already in this industry, and we were, streaming on 3G, using RTP and AVC, and then Apple arrived and said, we're going to do HTTP live streaming using MPEG-TS. And we were like, dudes, this is all wrong. We're just going to waste our bandwidth. What is this? And it took us how many years to deploy CMAF instead? And now we're only talking about switching to media over quick and HTTP3 that wouldn't rely on TCP and, 15 years in the middle.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, it's not too innovative, right?
Yeah, you need to do it. So let's make it work and let's make it correctly, but then we just wasted 15 years. That's a choice.
Well, thanks for providing at least one perspective of this.
Yeah, but that's because when we did it, actually, we were part of the standardization on this, and that's why we implemented it almost 10 years ago. There wasn't traction. The traction was on 3D, and 3D never took off, basically, because people don't want to buy an expensive headset and just put it on their face. The best use case for it is not video, that's video streaming, that's video games. So as I said, there are other use cases for video, but outside the streaming media industry, that's not a mass market. VR is popular in the industry in general, or in retail, or you can do some training, you can immerse people in a specific situation. We have lots of customers on the medical environment. It makes sense, but it doesn't make sense for me in the streaming media industry. That's my take.
Yeah.
At the current price point, it's a little tough, for sure.
Yeah, you don't need to use this device, and probably the other devices may be compatible with the content that is generated for the Apple Vision Pro, for sure. But do people want to use this technology? I'm unsure. They've been using 3D, using other technologies as well. Not sure.
Yeah. So basically, you at least mentioned that, for example, in the medical imaging world, where right now like a lot of learning environment, So people will think, okay, if you have the 3D demo, that's more intuitive for the students to not just learn, but they feel and they could see. And so different ways present the knowledge.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I think our industry focuses too much on the acronyms, etc. We're creating virtual barriers. People are just interested in solving problems. They have problems and issues, and they need just to solve it. And in the medical environment, they just don't ask if that's AV1 or a motion GPAC. Most of the time, they just don't care. Just want to make sure it's low latency. They know that sometimes they send, difficult images for codecs. So, for example, they are interested in HDR, but not for the same reasons as the reasons of the movie makers. Just interested in this because if you're looking at an image, you want to make sure that you can differentiate some areas from some others in surgery, for example. So these people, when they come to see us, they don't say, hey, I want MPEG Dash with this and this. They just say, I need to stream images, and these are the sample images that I have, and I have a constraint that it must fit in this number of megabit per second with this latency. What can we do? That's all they say. It's not like, hey, I need to avoid this codec because there are patents, and I need to avoid this because it's not going to be hardware decoded by this device, or it's not deployed on AWS, or whatever. They don't have this level of constraints. They're just concentrated on the problems. And I just feel that our industry should do the same. For example, they are not able to deploy any innovation. Let's made it clear. But when it comes to making money, they can deploy anything. Like personalized ads, we can do it, and they make something that is not convergent. Let's say at the moment it's a bit complex still to deploy. They are converging, but super slowly. But at the moment you have ad insertion and you're tracking the users, etc. Why don't you use this tracking technology to provide something that is super useful for the users? Why don't we have like in-app or in-video purchase for any use case? Why don't they put the focus on this? Why don't they put the focus on not only providing advertisement, but also information? Like someone is talking about something and you see a link where you can click and you can get additional information. Why don't they provide this? They all provide customized advertisement, and they are not able to provide this to the user. That would be, added value to this. When you're watching your content, it's plain 2D video. It's like your TV 40 years ago. That's the same. It hasn't evolved. The user experience hasn't evolved. For me, that's the real problem. They're complaining that the users go away and they play video games and they prefer browsing the web and they prefer, just improve the user experience. If you engage people, they say, low latency. People are not asking for this. Well, I don't know. If you put low latency and people are really engaged and they can ask, questions, etc. If you can make it engaging, people will follow. For me, that's just, a trivial truth. It's not done correctly by the actors. They are not, putting the money in this. They just putting the money in different areas, like creating always the same 2D video content, and then complaining that, nothing happens.
Well,
But there are really innovative companies. We have. I'm going to tell you. We have customers providing, engaging their audience for sports. So you're watching sports, and they're providing as an overlay. You can hover and get some statistics on the players and see some replay on similar games, etc. That's values, right?
yeah.
But we need that for all the content, not only for sports.
Right. In at least
So,
for the IPL in India, yeah. By IPL
yes.
in India, they had
Yeah, so
multi-view. You could switch the camera angles, a 360-degree camera on top of the stadium, so you could see the match from above. Pretty decent innovations, I would say. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. There are tons of use
Yeah.
cases that are interesting, but it's I, I don't know how to say that, but for me t- not traditional, but the people in the streaming media industry don't realize how much the lack of innovation is a problem for them. They have the feeling they're not competing in a fair way with the companies from the Silicon Valley, but it's not what's happening. Traditional broadcasters, they have tens of thousands of content in their catalog that they can use for free, but they need to do the work that is necessary to refresh it, to clean it, to present it to the users in a really compelling way so that people, come back and see their content. You know, they could make an alliances to all together to propose international content, etc. It's not like, oh, Netflix is creating content and they are closer to the users. They're producing all over the world now. You've been producing all over the world for 30 years. Don't tell me you cannot do that. You see the other broadcasters, you make an agreement with all the national broadcasters from the other countries, and you have a catalog of, hundreds of thousands of content that Netflix will never have. What is the difference? Of course you need new content, and better content. And we don't do content, we don't create content the same way as we did 30 years ago, for sure. But people like classics too. They buy companies based on advertisement, having a not new catalog, only, they rebuy old catalogs. They are like Pluto TV, and, this works. Or when you go to Disney Plus, for example, because you have kids and you want to see the old classics movies.
That's true.
So for me, it's I'm not a specialist in all this market stuff. But for me, it's doing innovation. I just see my biggest market is streaming media, and my biggest innovation market is somewhere else. There's a discrepancy.
Yeah, that's a good insight. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, we can tell that you are the evangelist of open source innovations, and then on top of this, there is usability and user experiences and addressing the real world issues down there. And then, so we like to actually learn a little bit of you, because right now, everybody talking about AI, and then there's a lot of things going on there, like we already touched the model, and then that will partially, because we know that some of the standardization activities that we're thinking about that, and then so you are running this community to support that. There's a lot of potentially Gen AI videos that will also come into being. There's a lot of ways that it influences every single part of the industry as well as our daily life. So what's your view related to streaming and the things that you are engaged at this moment? Yeah.
So first, it's not my job. The more video we have, the better for me. AI generated, user generated movies wouldn't make a difference. That being said, when I saw ChatGPT for the first time, my wife is a graphist, and so she's been following the mid-journey stuff, evolving from version 1 to version 2 to version 3, where it just got, kind of uncanny to most people, because they just said, hey, on the creativity stuff, for most people, it does the job instead of me. So it's really funny because AI just replaces that for the creative stuff, and I was really scared, and I said, oh, should I go into this? And at this moment, there was no CPU implementation that would be open source, and so I dug into it. I remember that was the Christmas holidays. I was at my parents' place, and I was starting to develop like crazy, trying to understand how the inference would work, etc., and doing the training. And eventually some other people took over, and I came back, just because my only conclusion is that I think we overestimate the human intelligence. That just says that about us. We just says, wow, that's magic. But again, when you think about it, people are replaced by machine, not when the machines are perfect, but just when the machines are better than humans. And this is just the inflection point. You know, you can replace human drivers by robots as soon as you can show that the robots are better than humans. That's all. I think that's all people care about. You can replace the driver of a plane as soon as the driver is better. You can replace a human on a robot as soon as the robot is better than the human. For me, when you are thinking about this as a thought experiment, that's when it's happening. And this is what has happened with the LLM in terms of language. They just talk better. They just write and read better than most of us. You know, I'm not a native English writer. It makes a perfect sense for me to ask ChatGPT or a competitor to write some English stuff for me. It's too complex for me. That's a foreign language. Even though I'm talking English all day. It's so much easier. They are so much better than me. So of course I need to check for the semantics because most of the time it's just, you know, creating stuff or putting a false fact on it. But for me it's not the problem. And for video that's the same. As soon as the video looks realistic, there's going to be some new video that's going to be created. Up to a point where, you know, there's a problem like the web was user-generated. We trained on the content that was user-generated, and suddenly everything is flooded by machine-generated content. So the problem is what is going to happen now, because the new models are going to be trained on, you know, machine-generated content. So what's going to happen? Yeah. But for me, it's the natural way is this. But we are far from humans consuming machine-generated content, like machine-generated video. I think you would never pay for this nowadays, and that's going to be the same for quite some amount of time. But if, for example, a small company like mine or Visionular wanted to create an advertisement that is a video, I'm pretty sure we could use it to make it cheaper to do it. Definitely. Writing blog articles, that's what I said. We are flooded by fake content at the moment. It's impossible. I think it's impossible right now to read. There is no genuine content anymore. Most of the companies don't write their own content. They just say, I have these ideas, and say to ChatGPT, provide some content that is a blog article. And then I say, wow, that's too long. So I asked ChatGPT to say, what are the main ideas of this article? This is becoming stupid. That's my take on this. So I don't know, but for me, it's just more videos to process. So it's good for business, I guess.
Well, thank you for actually sharing this. And then we actually, even myself today, learned a lot. I think the source motivations and then the mission and vision behind GPAC, as well as the motion spell business that you're running at this moment. Now, for quite a long time ago, and then for the keep the sustaining of GPAC, we know that all this effort will ongoing. But then, as you mentioned, there's a lot of new content will come, and the new requests emerge from the market, and innovations will always be there, and then push everything forward. So I'm going to wrap up. We had a lot of discussion today, but based on what we discussed today, we love actually down the road to invite you back to our podcast to share what we discussed today, how they evolve, and then because we look at the streaming industry, we look at a lot of new video content, and then you also mentioned even you think AB1, who actually to us is still just a takeoff, but it's already 6 years old. So new things are coming. So we'll see what's going to happen in the next near future. And then we can actually come back and discuss this topic again. And I really, really appreciate all your sharing with us today.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Krishna.
Thanks
Thank you,
also
Roman.
to be the co-host. We actually thanks everybody to be with us for this episode. Again, thanks a lot for us to learn about GPAC, learn about motion spell, and learn about all this open source as well as the effort behind it to again, innovations is the key, and that's actually drive everything move forward, and we're going to enjoy the even better world definitely uh, down the road. Thanks everyone to listening to our episode. We'll see you next time.